They do something about it on different scales. We're going to hear from people working all the way down from single-family homes to citywide project scale. So really interested in hearing about this. Today, we have our moderator from ComEd, Mark Milby. Great guy to lead this discussion, and really interested to hear what you guys have to say. So Mark, I'm going to hand this off to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks again to Ajit for organizing. My name is Mark Milby. I'm so excited to be the tangible projects in the ground guy and moderate this session. Although we've been lucky, we've already actually heard not just about the theoretical or the modeling, we've actually already heard today about some really interesting leading projects that are in policies that are ongoing locally. Welcome to the third track of this event. We're going to be focused on Chicago's best practices. We're going to be talking about case studies of putting decarbonization and sustainability into practice. My name is Mark Milby. I manage an innovation team for the ComEd Energy Efficiency Program. And if I could just take 30 seconds to describe a little bit about what my team does and what ComEd does. Most of you are probably already aware that ComEd maintains a very large energy efficiency and demand response program. Our current portfolio of demand side management programs is the largest in ComEd's history and at over $420 million annual spend. It's one of the largest in the country as well. And thanks to the this new plan, as well as the new clean energy law, there are a number of enhancements that just started this year and will go on forward. One of those is that we're dedicating over $100 million of that budget per year specifically to low-income customers. Those would be weatherization and single-family and multi-family home retrofit programs. And then another thing that the new clean energy law enabled for the first time is for ComEd to promote electrification. I know we've been talking a lot about that today. And so this is a key, I believe ComEd will play a key role in regional decarbonization through electrification and promotion of heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, a number of other measures. We've talked mostly about residential, I think, so far when we've been talking about heat pumps, but we're also interested in promoting technologies like lithium-ion battery forklifts, commercial kitchen equipment that is high efficiency electric, things like that. So we hope over the next 4 years that these new policy changes and these programs that we're implementing at ComEd help create deep energy savings and new customer opportunities across the region. So today we're going to hear from 3 industry leaders locally about groundbreaking projects that have happened right here or are happening right here in our community. And my hope is that these presentations provide you with inspiration and a glimpse into exciting decarbonization strategies that have already been deployed or are being deployed locally. Our agenda is going to cover a low-rise residential case study. I'll go back to the pictures in a second. Our agenda is going to cover a low-rise residential case study, a large institutional case study, and then it will close with a look at the Array of Things project. And our presenters are Tom Bassett-Dilley, Doug Farr, and Charlie Catlett. And I'll just read some short bios and then we'll get started. Our first presenter is Tom Bassett-Dilley, AIA, founded TVDA in 2006 to pursue sustainability in architecture based on region, climate, and context. Toward that end, he became a certified passive house consultant in 2010 to learn advanced energy modeling, building science, and principles of conservation. He's a founding member and past president of the Chicago Passive House Alliance chapter and served for 6 years on Oak Park's Historic Preservation Commission. Since 2011, Tom has regularly presented locally and nationally on topics relating to energy efficiency, health, and comfort in new and old buildings alike. TVDA has designed many PIAS or Passive House, what is that, Passive House Institute US, Source Zero LEED, and DOE Zero Energy Ready certified projects in the Midwest. Our next presenter will be Doug Farr. Doug Farr is a nationally recognized architect, urbanist, and author. He leads Chicago-based Farr Associates, a pioneering sustainability-driven architecture and urban design firm that plans and designs lovable and aspirational buildings and places. The firm was recognized by the New York Times as the most prominent of the city's growing cadre of ecologically sensitive architects. He co-chaired the development of the U.S. Green Building Council's Lead for Neighborhood Development and has served on the boards of urban sustainability organizations, including the Congress for the New Urbanism, Bioregional, Eco Districts, and Elevate, who we've heard from, lucky to hear from twice today. He was personally deemed one of Planetism's.
Stop.
Okay. Charlie Catlett is our final speaker. He's a senior research scientist at the Discovery Partners Institute at the University of Illinois System. He holds appointments at Argonne National Laboratory and the University of Chicago's Institute for Urban Innovation. His research is focused on high-performance computing and internet technologies since 1985. And during the past decade, he has created and grown multiple Chicago-based research initiatives focused on understanding cities through data science and intelligent sensors. He was recognized as one of Crane's Tech 50 in 2014, GovTech Magazine's 25 Doers, Dreamers, and Drivers in 2016, and an Argonne Board of Governors Distinguished Performer in 2019. Okay, so with that, we'll get started with our first presenter, Tom. Thank you.
All right. Hey. Thanks everybody who put this on. This is a heck of a convening. Is that better? Thanks. I just had the greatest, like, most technical lunch talk of my life, and I think we're asking ourselves, you know, sort of why aren't these things happening? And the thing is, we're making it happen right now. So let's keep doing it. I'm going to talk about something pretty small scale, but huge for me, which is my house, which we bought back in 2001. And like a lot of old houses in Oak Park, it was just an energy. So I started my firm in 2006, interested in sustainability, like the intro said, and got to design and had built some of the first passive houses in the area and helped kind of cheer that on. So these are some of the houses. Some of these are passive. There's a bunch more, but let me see. Pointer is this guy. Yes, Keller Center in Oak Park, which is now a PS Source Zero, and it's on the MBI list. So it's not all houses, but it's mostly houses, including this old Frank Lloyd Wright one, which is we're decarbonizing that, which has been a real kick. Let's get in here. Anybody's way, right? Am I in the way of this? Is that okay?
Okay.
All right. So little frame bungalow in Oak Park, and I think what's interesting about the idea of decarbonizing houses is that even within the same typology, like a bungalow, well, first of all, there's frame bungalows and brick bungalows, and then within these, like some of the people did like the people before us and enclosed part of the front porch and made it total disaster with the thermal performance, cold floor, cold walls, leaks like crazy. So eventually I got a blower door test, and it was about ACH of 10. Should I switch here?
No, you push the mute button.
I'm pushing the mute button. Are you muted? Okay, there we go. And thanks. Sorry. So got a blower door test, and just like 10 ACH. And I was like, this is crazy. This thing just leaks like a sieve. So I knew I had to do something interesting big, and it took me a while to be able to save up enough and frankly learn enough about really specifically how to make every solution to every problem that this house had. But really, the thing is, what started it was the squirrels. So there were holes here. They finally got in after watching them peck away for a while. They got in, and it was like, okay, we can't live like this. So when we got a loan to do the renovation work, and because interest rates were so good, I could afford it. So the asbestos siding is something I wanted to deal with responsibly. That was probably 7 years old and starting to get flaky and weird, and that's like when you get nervous about asbestos. And the water heater had died or was on its last dying breath. HVAC was gas. I was like, okay, I really need to think about how I want to do this. I wanted to do a passive house retrofit, but the way the metrics stood with what I'd already done with the roof, I had done some open cell foam in the roof. Okay, we'll try to here. Thanks. All right, this one. Okay, I'm gonna get close. Roof, yes, thanks. So with that and these double pane windows that I put in, way early on. I knew I wasn't going to quite get to those metrics, but I thought, well, maybe I can get to the source energy metric. So from an overall energy consumption standpoint, I could improve the envelope enough. I could make it as airtight as possible. I could replace the gas with electricity. I'm going to get close there. And I sort of engaged with FIAS, the past classes, to say, maybe we should be thinking about this standard because it doesn't make sense for me. It's not going to make sense for a lot of other people. But if people want sort of technical guidance and, third-party verification, nobody else that I know of is really providing that. So anyway, so Al at FIAS and I and Graham have been talking about this. And so we'll be talking about this at the FIAS conference, some case studies. We've got about 5 projects like this going on right now. And none of them are making the regular metrics, but there's a new kind of revised standard that's coming out. So I did the energy modeling. We're consultants, so we do that. And I said, yeah, I can get to the FIAS source energy metric with a little bit of solar on the roofs, and it's going to make it more comfortable. And all the things we know about a good enclosure, it's going to be more durable, more comfortable, and more healthy because I'm going to bring in an ERV and get good ventilation. And I'm not going to have gas in there providing, toxins and all that stuff. And I figured maybe I could make the house look a little better. So as part of last year's pre-built home tour through the Illinois Green Alliance, I kind of put my thoughts down in a retrofit flow chart. Kind of what would the ideal scenario be if you were going to take care of the whole building. And so in a nutshell, it was, take care of the roof first because the building science aspect of the house is a stack effect. House is a chimney kind of thing. Take care of the walls. That's usually the biggest surface area. Deal with the basement, almost more for environmental issues like moisture than for thermal comfort, or depending if you're living down there or not. But really moisture and indoor health. And then replace the mechanicals, because by that point, you're going to have a really efficient envelope. So instead of needing 5 tons of cooling, maybe you need 2. So you can get a smaller unit, and you don't oversize and have all those issues. And then after you've done that, you put some solar on the roof, and bingo, you're maybe close to net zero, which to me is not necessarily the goal. I think the goal is to have a good low consumption, but 0 is a great number to aim for. I got 2. So anyway, so there's a little interactive version of this that Illinois Green kind of went up for and did it. So if you're interested as a kind of a homeowner's approach, tries to give some background information, because there's a ton of building science behind all this stuff. And if you don't get it right, you're going to screw up your house. And so Elevate can talk to you about that. So anyway, not the screw up part, but what not to do, how not to screw it up. Yeah, sorry, you guys are great. We love what you do. So yeah, here's the energy model output from my house before. So it was uninsulated. There was no insulation anywhere, except for a little bit of cellulose that had settled when they had tried to enclose the back porch. So that thing with single glazing was so crazy that I did a stopgap measure with some polycarbonate panels just like glued to the inside. It was crazy. But anyway, you can see that what we find when we do energy models of houses is that most of the energy in a poorly insulated house is heating. And if you know EUI, energy use intensity, that's 113 is like super high. And part of that is this 10 ACH 50, it's a drafty house. And so in order to really provide heating in the worst case, you need like 100,000 BT. You're looking at an 8-ton heating element. So that's huge. I want to show you what we get to after we retrofit this. Okay, so I stripped it down, basically. I knew I was taking off the asbestos, and so I thought, well, I could just encapsulate that asbestos with rigid insulation, but I don't get a good airtightness barrier, and I still leave that asbestos here on my house. Let's get rid of it. So we decided finally to do that. We knew that we could strip it down and take off the old siding and strip it to the old sheeting. So that's what the sheeting looks like. That's why these houses aren't airtight. That's part of why the houses aren't airtight. Another one is this little hole right here. This is like the moment of like poetry and construction. When we finally pulled that siding off, I saw that little hole. That's where the coal used to go. And right next to it is where the gas meter used to be. And so that's gone. So it's like in the past, in two generations of fossil fuel burn. So yeah, they just sort of laid some bricks in there. It's crazy. So yeah, so heat pump, first heat pump went in late in the summer. And so yeah, so I'm getting ahead of myself. So what do? Well, we needed to make that the envelope airtight. So we wrapped all of that leaky stuff with this Henry Blue skin. So it's a peel and stick membrane, just put it on. And it got a little fussy here at the top. We hadn't done the top yet. Cutting it in between the rafters and stuff like that. And, you know, you basically tape it off to the foundation and then try to figure out how to make these three-dimensional bends like up here where the uninsulated crawl space underneath the living room is going to be. And we don't have a perfect air barrier, but anyway, we're trying to do everything as passive house as we can without, you know, tearing too much of this apart, because we didn't actually have to do anything in the interior except for the except in the back room. So in the basement, there was no insulation. The slab was cracked. We had a little bit of radon. Moisture comes up. It's just, you know, centipedes come up. It's just horrible. You know, it's just not a civilized environment. Oops, I'm advancing to my excitement, and also because of my shame. This is XPS, which is got a horrible global warming potential because of the HFC gas that they use to when in the extrusion process. And this is just an example of one of the lessons learned. If you really want to make sure that carbon content and indoor air quality is as good as it can be, you got to control every piece and product that comes onto the job site. And good contractors will do this. They won't let their subs bring anything. They'll hand it to them. Say, you're going to use this sealant, you're going to use this adhesive, you're going to use this paint, and you're going to use this insulation. So anyway, it's on site. The guys are coming to do the concrete. And so anyway, yeah, so I tore out the old slab, dug it down a couple inches just to be able to maintain the ceiling height while putting in a couple inches of XPS. And then this white stuff here is a EPS extruded polystyrene expanded rather insulation called InsoFast. So it's got these ribs in it. You can just screw drywall right to it. So anyway, yeah, and then this is the vapor barrier underneath. So we you know, encapsulated so we don't have soil gas coming in, we don't have radon coming in, and we're ventilating. So basement is now dry and warm. And so during construction, so things looking a little ratty, but I swear it's really nice now. This is a heat pump dryer. So we got rid of all the gas burning everything. This is a little Bosch, which is a sweet little unit. I will say that sometimes it doesn't quite get things all the way dry if they're a certain kind of thing, like a big heavy comforter or something like that. So we hang things down and I'm cursing, why are we doing this? And I'm sure there's all kinds of others. There are bigger capacity ones and all that. They work. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm not saying it's perfect from a drawing perspective. As to me, the craziest energy picture you can imagine, which is we're going to burn a bunch of gas inside our house to make this room really hot. And we're going to blow it out the side of the house. You know, it's like how to waste energy. You know, a gas dryer is stupid. It's just the stupidest thing. How can you do that in a building? So anyway, maybe I'm so that's the heat pump, and then this is the heat pump water heater, which is a Rheem, and yes, it has a fan, and yes, it makes noise, and yes, it cools down the basement even during the winter time. But we didn't find it to be that much of a problem. It didn't really cool it down a lot. And one of the things that really stunned me once we got the mechanicals up and running is that stratification just wasn't really an issue in the house anymore. It's not like the basement was 62 and the attic was 70. And partly it's because I got this ventilation unit. It's the CERV, the conditioning ERV. So we're shooting for, you know, about 0.3 air changes an hour. Is that right? Al, what's the TS? 0.3, right?
That's old.
Okay.
Like 2015.
Anyway, yeah. So I don't know how that compares to what Ashley says and all that stuff, but yeah, so this is a conditioning energy recovery ventilator. So we have exhaust coming out of laundry, bathrooms, kitchen, and we got a nice set of filters in there that have charcoal in them to take out the cat litter smell. Actually, the cat litter smell just goes straight outside the house, and we have the heat exchange in this unit. And then that's a Mitsubishi ducted unit for heating and cooling of the basement and first floor. Then we have a ductless unit upstairs. That's all the sort of electrical components to replace the gas. And yeah, it adds up. You know, I can't see scaling this without serious incentives for people who don't have, you know, 140 grand to go out and borrow. I mean, really, this is the issue. I had to pay for an electrical panel upgrade. That was like $3 grand, I think, from the electricians. I had to go from 100 amp to 200 amp. And there were complications because the way old service came in, and we had to relocate the pipe and redo the way the solar came in. So it's like these things, they all add up, and when we start to do the numbers on how we're gonna scale up, or how do we do a lot of these houses, you know, if they're all like at least 30 grand to get going, just the heat pump system, replace the gas boiler, new dryer, new stove, the range rather. I tell you, this is induction. I love cooking on induction. First of all, I'm not bringing in these toxic gases that, you know, I was monitoring with one of those Aware, the little indoor air quality thing you can get your hands on for $200. And every time I cook, I'd see the CO2s and the particulates just spike, you know. I'm not always stir frying, but, you know, we do like to cook a lot. And anyway, so this thing, it's just way cleaner. It doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't, you're not getting that gas sticky stuff. And anyway, super controllable. So anybody who's got doubts about it, forget it. Don't cook with gas. All right, so then we already had, because of the incentives, we want to get the maximum incentive. So in 2020, we did solar. So we already had the solar on the roof. And so after we did all this insulation, which I'm sorry, I'm just so scared today. But after the blue skin, we put up this, which is it's called Styco. It's a wood fiberboard exterior continuous insulation. So we're trying to go low carbon with all of our material choices, using cellulose in the walls for retrofit blown in, and then wood fiberboard is a carbon negative material. So the amount of carbon it sequesters when it grows, you know, is a number, and then it takes a little bit of carbon to turn it into this product, and it comes from waste product. So it's diverting from waste. So this is like, I love this stuff. It's only about R8 for the 2 3/8 inches, 16 millimeter, I think, but they have 80 millimeter, 120 millimeter, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it's really solid. It feels great. And when you cut it, it's kind of making sawdust. It's making like almost like compost, right? Versus when you cut EPS, you get these pebbles flying everywhere, and you know, your garden hates you, and your neighbors hate you. So we try to avoid the plastics as much as we can. So anyway, that got my walls good. My roof is already somewhat decent. The foundation got done right. I used an HFO closed cells foam, which is a lower embodied carbon foam for the floors of my front and back rooms. And voila, we get done without replacing windows, but just the mechanical systems, everything. Our EUI is about 11. Now we just added another 4.2K solar. So there's like another 4 panels here, another 8 back here. And so that brought our EUI down to 2. So we're not quite net zero, but way less. And this is the thing that really amazed me when I did the energy modeling. The furnace size goes down to a 2-ton system from what had been an 8-ton system. So you can cut that by, you know, factor 4 like that. So that's a less expensive piece of equipment to use, to have to buy. So yeah, that's kind of our journey. We're still funding up things. This is some older pictures of the back, you know, when it's cold out, and I haven't moved the ladder. But the thing about these heat pumps is really interesting, because a lot of people are afraid that, you know, you're going to have a problem in a really cold spell. The installer that I use, Greg Suter, Suter Heating and Cooling out of Farr, he said, I haven't had a problem with these Mitsubishi Hyperheat units. And so I was a little skeptical, because our only backup heat source was space heaters, which, you know, is a possibility. You could get a series of those and get you through a real cold spell. But this is well, this is my dog. But this is a 2-ton unit for the basement and first floor, and a 1-ton unit for the attic. And when we had that really cold spell in early January, I think it was 5 below, I didn't realize I didn't have the upstairs unit on, and my thermostat had dropped about a degree or 2 below set point. So if I had set it 68, it was at 67, 66. I realized I was only running 2/3 capacity, and it was like 5 below. It's basically design temperature. So I was like, wow, these things really do work. Now, granted, it was running pretty hard. It's when it's going to use the most energy, but still, it's not much. And then I did put in an Emporia energy monitor, which is a pretty simple little thing to just sort of clip on to your leads in there, to see kind of where it's going. So this one actually is just from beginning of June. I just ran this the other day, June 1st to 17th. And you know, our ducted air handler is doing a fair amount of the cooling. And as I looked at this, I realized I had things backwards. I had the set point for the downstairs unit, the bigger unit, set a little bit low, so it was running more than it should have. I should have been using more of the ductless. It's a little more efficient, the smaller unit, in terms of its shear rating. So anyway, yeah, you can see the serve, runs a fair amount. So it uses a fair amount of energy. The water heater, I don't know how many kilowatt hours that would be per day, but anyway, this is kind of nice information to have. And when I get like a year of it, it's really going to become more and more useful, I think. So, so yeah, I think I've kind of hit on a lot of these, experience things. I will say the thing about comfort is it really does feel like a different environment. I mean, without having radiant sources around you that are, just really cold everywhere, you feel it. It's a very nice kind of comforting feeling. I don't know how to say it. Just get up. My wife got up in the morning in the winter. She's like, "Wow, it's really novel not to have this floor cold." And I just never thought about it. Just get used to this sort of poor performing outfit. I was like, hey, you're right. Everything is not miserable. So anyway, yeah, that's pretty much what I got. I did take this picture just a couple days ago. Wanted to mention this siding here also, if you're interested, just on the sort of more the material side of things. That's a material that's called a thermally modified wood, so it's really super durable. It's pine, unfinished. Yeah, I've got some shading devices here. They're going to kind of echo these struts like so. They're going to be here so I can get some passive shading outside as sort of a fabric thing that I can put on for the summer, because that's kind of our like passive problem. We have to pull those curtains in the afternoon, it's west facing, so we really get heat up, and then the system gets a little wonky because the thermostat goes up, and then the first floor starts running a lot, and it dumps it dumps a lot of that to the basement. So that's when we get the stratification. We get a colder basement in the summertime, but not in the wintertime. It's really kind of weird. So anyway, these are some materials that we use, or resources that we turn to. And thanks again, everybody, for this great conference and great knowledge sharing. Just national.
Any questions for Tom in the transition? Question?
I might have missed it on your slide. What was the total upfront cost to retrofit your home? I also have a bungalow, so.
Yeah, what was the upfront cost of this project? I haven't broken it out by just the decarbonization stuff versus like refinishing the kitchen floor. And yeah, so anyway, we wound up spending about 150 grand. Rebuilt the back room, put the new bathroom in the basement, new mechanicals, new electrical. The back room is a pretty big rebuild, and we kind of tricked it out a little bit with, well, actually the salvage floor. I mean, it's got nice triple glazed windows. So this is the thing. It's really a difficult dollar number because the basement is one thing, if you need to do the basement or not. But anyway, that's what I spent. So I say anywhere from like 50 to 200,000. Probably a good budget. Hey, 30. Yeah.
Hey, Tom, great job there. Thanks for sharing. Just one question on that use of solution.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile importing a low carbon product like Styco's to a carbon solution versus using a domestic higher carbon product, maybe like Fiberboard, rock wool?
Yeah. So the question is, how does the carbon footprint of my material look if I'm importing a German wood board instead of using like a domestically made rock wool? And the answer is, I'm sure that's calculable, but I don't know. But I suspect that given the transportation carbon, I doubt is huge. I will say that one place I would look would be the beam tool. Builders for Climate Action is a Canadian group that just put this beam tool out that will let you look at the embodied carbon of materials. Really great, pretty easy to use and expensive software. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Rockwool's pretty good. We use it on a lot of projects. But yeah, I don't know. Do you think you know how much of a difference it is?
Well, it depends where the final destination is, if it was shipped independently or came on larger freight and stored in the US. But will have American made.
Thank you, yes, Go Logic, what are they called?
Go Lab. Great.
Go Lab Timber HP, oh my God, my friend Alan Gibson and his cadre up there in Maine are finally making their domesticates, so I think next year it'll be up and running. Pretty great. Are we doing questions in between here?
It's just
Or
a
are we?
problem.
Okay, sorry.
Last question.
Favorite time of year?
Favorite time of year?
Favorite time.
Payback time? No. I did not calculate. I didn't even try. The question was, could I afford to do something I really wanted to do? And the answer is yes. So, I mean, energy savings, I'm probably saving maybe a couple $100 a month. I mean, it's gonna be hugely long payback period, but who knows how much this house is gonna go up and down in value. I mean, none of that, all that stuff is crystal ball, you know, which I don't have. So, I mean, I can do it, so I did. It's kind of the way I approached it.
Cool. Good afternoon. That was cool, Tom.
Thank you.
Isn't that a round of applause for Tom? He's like, what we call bringing climate home. So I think a lot of us want to have the world change in fundamental ways, but no better way than to start with it yourself. So thank you for being that inspiring guy. So this project couldn't be more different than the one you just saw. So it's also a renovation, but this is a project. It's the Keller Center at the University of Chicago, which is the first permanent home for the Harris School of Public Policy. Farr Associates was the architect for this, and it's called transformational restoration. So Tom lives in Oak Park. They're very precious about their landmarks. It seems like they didn't care about your house. You could do it how you wanted, but this one didn't have that same kind of hands-off attitude. So Harris School, it is a mistake that the one building on campus that really took sustainability to the max was the public policy school. The business school probably wouldn't have done it, and others, but Harris was a good fit. Their tagline is social impact down to a science. So what a perfect client for a high performance building. So let's see, here we go. The thing that was pointed out to me when I shared the slide deck with everybody was how big our team was. So Tom's team for his house is Tom, and good contractors. I think it's kind of what I'm hearing, which is great. Yeah. Sorry. Farr Associates. I'm sorry. Skip the Farr Associates slide. Been at it a long time. We do buildings and planning. So leave it at that. Above the line, our buildings are designed below the lines of plans we've prepared, and so places in the buildings. But anyway, back to the project. So we had this many consultants. So I think it was 18 consultants to work on this project at the university, which is maybe par for the course. Maybe it's an extra 2 or 3 or 5 because of the sustainability agenda. And the question I was posed was, how do you get anything done with that many people? And the flip side is, I would retort and say you can't get this project done without that many people. So you need that many areas of expertise, but it is an extra layer of management. So this project started in, believe it or not, 2009, and it opened 10 years later in 2019. So it's a 10-year project. So we conceived of it back in 2009 and 2010. We went on hold for fundraising. It sort of became alive in 2014, but that was a head fake. And it really kind of came alive about 2015, 2016. But from the get-go, we had this dual goal of LEED Platinum, which was in 2009 when we proposed it. Still felt like the center of the universe in green building performance. By the time we were done in 2019, we had sort of done preliminary analysis enough before you're going to be able to attain the water pedal in the living building challenge. So, oops. Whoop. Well, anyway, we couldn't do full OBC, so we did what's called pedal certification. We could maybe talk about that in Q&A. But we were, and this all happened at the University of Chicago, which is a place that prides itself on not taking positions in issues that are actively in public debate. It would rather let the campus foster an environment of intellectual curiosity and debate rather than saying, here's the right answer. So we actually had to get some approvals from up the hierarchy of the university to do something ambitious in a sustainability sense because it appeared to be taking a stand. That interesting, how about free speech played out to the max. So, but anyway, so that's kind of what set us on our course, and we were able to do it. I meant to say because we had one supercharged, enlightened project manager in the facilities department who acted as though she had the authority to add to our contract all these good things. And I don't know how high up in the food chain that went, but it worked. So, so here's our consultant team, and we did this just kind of a symbolic kickoff, but you should recognize many of our friends in the room, many of the collaborators that we work with all over the years, I'm sure all of you, but a great team. And we did this meeting 2 or 3 times. The project was so long-lived that we burned through two deans. So we had 3 different deans. That was kind of the head of the college. We started with Colma Merhertig and Alicia Morisaki there, and then changed 2 times since then. The context here is the midway at the U of C, Lake Michigan, the midway, and then that blue shaft is the project site. This was the midway, isn't just a name. It was the midway for the Columbian Exposition. So the Harris School building was sits right there. I think it was next to like the Bhutan Pavilion or something like that. There were like Gucci dancers or some kind of thing out in front of Harris School. So, but anyway, so it's got some rich history. So again, the midway, Jackson Park, Lake Michigan here. There's the building. There's the sort of frontage along the midway. It was designed, part of its preservation status was the fact that it was designed by a prominent mid-century architect, Edward Durrell Stone, who appeared here on the cover of Time magazine in 1958. Back when architects appeared on Time magazine, whatever that was. I don't know. It's a bygone era on so many levels. But, yeah, white guy architect on head of major magazine. So, but his kind of best building was the Delhi U.S. Embassy in Delhi, India, which was designed for a hot climate. It emphasized shade in interior courtyards and a ventilated facade so the breezes could go through there, cross ventilation on the whole thing. It was up on a plinth because the parked cars would otherwise bake in the Indian sun. You could come back at the end of the day and literally burn yourself by sitting in your car. So we kind of had a parking level, jacked the whole building up one level, got to the University of Chicago and said, all those things that I did in India, cool, let's do them in Chicago. So there it is, the raised plinth, no parking, just a plinth, kind of, this architecture I've described as neo-Langley, kind of what would the FBI or CIA, what would a unit of government that didn't want you to know what they were doing, what architecture would they adopt? There was the overhanging shade structure to help with the intense heat here in Chicago, and so on. And then he was inspired by sort of the Gothic architecture and predominance on the campus at U of C. So he did the facade in limestone, no thermal breaks. So inside, outside limestone. Precast was in good shape. Anyway, so that's what we inherited. And there he is, the happy man in front of his roll of drawings and kind of a, kind of mid-century vibe going on. So it wasn't without attributes, but it was pretty unlovable. I think it was considered the worst building on campus. So here's the transformation to the front. So we eroded the plinth since we had no parking and all that kind of stuff, sort of clawed it back, put ramps, landscaping, and opened up the 4 middle bays, removed the limestone, put bird glass here in this facade, which was a cool thing. It gets a lot of conversation, bird glass here and then bird glass in the upper story renovation, because it really was going to be a bird situation if we could do that. So here's the ground floor plan. What you'll see is the perimeter loggia, a very big footprint. So it's basically a soccer field, the whole thing. And in the Ed Stone era, it only had windows at the edges. So it was a very dark interior with a lot of fluorescent lighting. So here's the eroded corner plinth. We just figured out lines of desire on the campus where our students coming from and where students and faculty coming from and going to. That was the northwest corner. So we clawed away at the plinth there and made a certain inviting steps and seating and so on. So a little overlit in this photograph, but whatever. In the wrapper around the building, we had a setback of 30 to 50 feet that we could do different things with. So we landscaped it, made it gardens and water capturing elements. Here, I'm very proud of this. One of the things that we were able to do in lieu of installing a green roof, which is, a kind of one path through the Chicago zoning code, we took the money we would have spent on a green roof and spent it on a 15,000 gallon cistern in the basement. So all the roof water goes into that cistern, and we think we've reduced our total water demand we know it's between 90 and 95%. So flushing toilets, not surprisingly, in an academic or office building, most of the water use, a little bit of kitchen potable water use, otherwise is pretty minimal. But so here's the 15,000 gallon cistern. On the occasions when it gets maxed out, we have a conspicuous overflow right next to the front door. Here it is, that then sort of cascades and wraps around. Really beautiful landscape design from site design group, civil engineer, Terra Engineering, mechanical engineer, DBHMS, and that's who I thought that was. Eastwood Database Plus now, but you know who I'm talking about. So, so let's see. And here's kind of my energy slide on this because there's so many agendas going on here. But the original building, when we, before we started, had an EUI of 110, slightly less than Tom's house. That was a sucky house, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Thank God you did what you did. So, so the AIA 2030 benchmark was a 120. A 70% reduction under AIA 2030 challenge would have taken us to a 36. In 2016, when we modeled the energy use, we thought it was going to hit a 48. The building opened in 2019 and ran for a year pre-COVID at a 62, and then currently it's kind of a hard moment to catch good data because it's COVID. We can't tell if it's full occupancy or people are still working remotely, but it's functioning at a 51. So you could say from 110 to 51, it's 55 or so % reduction in energy use. The building burns no fossil fuels, and Joe Clare in the back could help explain to you a little better the decisions we made vis-a-vis connecting to the university's chilled and hot water system. And the hot water system burns what's mistakenly called natural gas. There's nothing natural about natural gas, so it's a fossil fuel gas. But we had to connect it. So, but here's an interesting thing. So our floor camera got some use out of this. So this is the building before renovation. You can tell you're in bad shape when your windows are performing better than your walls. It's usually the other way around. But when you have through wall limestone with no insulation, the windows actually have a higher R value than the stone. So we inherited that, and we were obligated by virtue of the mid-century importance of this architect to retain that facade. So we had to work from the inside. So, but in post-renovation, here's what you get is we're back to the windows being better or windows being worse than the walls. And here's the interior slums that we did. So we had 10-year-old kind of not special windows, kind of the same thing with you, Tom, like leave the windows alone if you can. So we did, and then we just added interior slums. So kind of worked out. Here's one of the spaces we salvaged these chandeliers from the Ed Stone building. So here it is, a kind of big long section through it. We cut in 3 different light courts or atrium. So this one's called the Forum. These are 2 light courts, east and west. And so you kind of see what those spaces are like along the top. Here's the kind of special place, the sort of town square for it. And we worked very close with Slipstream. Somebody's here from Slipstream. Who was that? It was, but we worked with, what's his name? Connor Jansen, who moved to Wisconsin. How dare he do that? We love him anyway. So, but he did a really beautiful series of daylighting studies for us that led us to this conclusion that in the forum, we had clerestory skylights that we actually oriented towards the south so we could get direct beam sunlight into the space, which is a no-no for, let me go back one, for these light courts, which are surrounded with academic research and faculties. Like, you don't want beams of light on your computer screen because there's glare. But in the town hall, you absolutely want shafts of light in particularly November, December, January, when we're all getting, blues and depressed and things because it's, oh my God, is it still winter? Will the sun ever come back? And so we convinced the third dean to go with the south-facing skylights and said, this is your Maserati. This will make a special place. People will feel kind of the vitality of life in this space. And that was absolutely true. A small bit of the energy agenda here was to encourage the use of the stairs rather than the elevator. As a sort of energy load on a building like this, it's only a few percent, less than 5, more likely 2-ish. Joe, I'm calling you for not. But we wanted to promote active living. And again, this is the public policy school. So we're trying to promote what are the things that an architect or a building can do to help. And the public health world is very clear that one of the best things you can do is to encourage people to take the stairs. And there's a stat that says 20 flights of stairs a week results in a 20% reduction in the risk of heart attack. So it's like, forget about Obamacare, forget about your monthly brains, take that effing stairs. But a lot of architects, particularly the mid-century folk, let's see where I show this. So here's the stair in context. So the stair goes from basement to roof. We call it the Great Stair. Here it is, kind of sculptural, beautiful. It's the interactive stair. It's the kind of default, easy way to get between floors. And this may seem cruel to you, but we hide the elevator. So rather than, if you think of so many mid-century office buildings, particularly those by means bungalows, you get in, you see these phalanx of elevators. So, well, where's the stair? Oh, no, we don't offer that. It's a choice. You think if you go into it like, will I ever escape? Will I be assaulted? Will I have to bring food and provisions? Will I ever get out? So what we did instead was to feature the stair, and then the elevator is behind a little sort of wing wall here. So it's immediately adjacent. So if you're concerned about justice, they are abutting. If you're concerned about daily behavior, no one takes the elevator that doesn't really need to. People take the stairs all the time, and they're healthier for it. So, and get me started on the codes, or whatever. So because we pursued the Living Building Challenge materials pedal, we had a really robust agenda and consultant team in support of checking every ingredient that went into the building. So we worked with Muhammad at WSP. We had, is he here? So Muhammad, and then he had under him a chemist. So we had chemists reading the MSDS or whatever declare label we got on these things. And we started with a really strong emphasis on recycled and reused materials. And Theaster Gates, he who is everywhere, he's in the Times this week again, who's a great artist on the South Side and adjunct faculty at the Harris School. We sat down with him early on and said, we have this vision for reused materials, salvage content. He said, well, I got this pile of trees that died of Dutch elm disease. I begged from the city and they're sitting in a pile. I want to start a lumber operation, a mill yard. I want to cut this up into stuff. I said, we'll take your stuff. We'll be your first customer. So we're excited that this industry that Theaster had envisioned had its first project. And that was, I'll go back and show you in the forum. All the wood here you see is emerald ash borer trees milled to usefulness by Theaster's local workers. So it's a cool story. The last thing the last slide for this, again, public policy. So we're trying to get ahead of issues. And this was conceived in 2014. Non-gendered bathrooms or all gendered bathrooms remain illegal under the Chicago Building Code, which is that Grant? Not true, but it was at the time. Okay, so it's not true anymore. When did the switch get thrown? Of 2021, okay. I'm proud to stand corrected. So, but we had a Denderdos meeting with the plumbing people who said, you know, you don't know what's gonna happen if you combine those sections there, like things are bad things are gonna happen, we can't let this happen. So we designed it with this little sliver wall. So, Grant, could we remove this wall now? Okay, I understand. Yeah, I'm not calling, asking for an audible exception to the member grant. Right, but so because we couldn't get it approved through the code at the time, we designed a kind of mostly symmetrical bathroom. Each stall has a floor to ceiling door. It's acoustically separated, the whole thing. So you don't know who's next to you regardless. So that little blue dash panel is that little blade of glass there. It was designed to be enlightened code ready. So apparently we have an enlightened code now. So, but anyway, so that was reclaimed doors and so on. I wanted to put in a pitch while I've got your undivided attention to come visit an exhibit at the Chicago Architecture Center called the Energy Revolution. And if you haven't heard of it, it's went up in April. It's up through October. I want to invite everyone here to come there. We can organize maybe through the invite list an event over there, but it takes everything Tom talked about, everything I talked about, and puts it in a real place. And you can see the appliances, you can kick the tires, and it's friendly to architects. So thank you. I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. And we have our final speaker now, Charlie Catlett.
Just looking for the mute button, so I don't hit it accidentally. So thanks for having me. If I had paid attention to the first two talks, when we were talking about the panel, I would have given a different talk. I would have talked about my sensor-laden home with about 100 different devices in my house. That all tell me, is this automatically advancing? Oh, this might be a Pechacucha accidentally. That tell me how bad my energy usage is in my house. So I'm quite inspired by these other two talks. I'm going to talk about projects that we've been doing over the last 10 years to understand what's happening in the city of Chicago with respect to, in terms of decarbonization and other things. If you think about what's happening in the city of Chicago with respect to the large scale effects of things like urban heat island, or I'm just going to leave that, urban heat island, or air pollution, or other things that people experience. If you look at the 2022 Chicago Climate Action Plan, for example, you'll see these maps of the city that talk about that you'll have one map that shows heat exposure in the neighborhoods that are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat or extreme cold, which then translates both to health and also energy costs. And then other maps that look at susceptibility to flooding. So there are these phenomena that happen across cities, and the only way to know what's really happening and then to prescribe some solution to what's happening is to measure those things. And if I think about, for example, the part of the Climate Action Plan is to invest almost $50 million on restoring the tree canopy across the city. Well, where would you plant those trees, and what kind of trees should you plant? If the question is just looking at those two questions, you want to know about precipitation, you want to know about humidity, you want to know about temperature across the city. You want to know about the soil types and the quality of soil across the city to know not just where, but what sort of trees to plant. So we started 10 years ago, and we were interested in things like noise and air quality and urban heat and the flow of traffic, all that came out of these different workshops that we had done with different science communities. And we said we'd like to measure the city in a higher spatial and temporal resolution than we can do today. You just think about air quality as an example. there are about a dozen EPA air quality stations in Chicago. That's not really enough to tell you neighborhood by neighborhood. It's enough to tell you sort of the south side is looking like this or the west side is looking like that. If you want to know about noise or even pedestrian or traffic flow, there were no sensors to tell you that. You had to send somebody out on the street corner and they had to mark in a clipboard or use a little gadget. So we really set out to think about how do we measure the city in greater detail like this. And we ended up with this project called the Array of Things, where we can see the distribution of devices on the right-hand side, about 150 devices that we install. But before we get to installation, we had to design a device that would host dozens of sensors that would send data from those sensors back to some place where we could process that data, map it, et cetera. And then because some of the measurements that we wanted to pursue, you couldn't buy a sensor for, you couldn't, like Radio Shack's not there anymore, but when it was, you couldn't go to Radio Shack and get a sensor that you plug in that says what's traffic flow, or a sensor we plug in that says how much of this area of the city is flooded. And so that meant that we had to design a device that also had cameras, microphones, and the ability to compute that data to do image processing or sound processing out at the node that the device on the pole. We did that for several reasons. One, the practical matter was 10 years ago, we wouldn't be able to afford the network to send images back from cameras. So we had to process those images right in place. Turned out there were other advantages as well that have to do with privacy that I'll talk about. So the Array of Things, you've already read this by now as I've been talking, started about 10 years ago. It's a 5-year project that went from 2015 to 2020. I'll talk about where we are today and the things that we're doing now with those 150 locations and more. You can see the institutions that were involved in this. In 2019, we got a follow-on project from the National Science Foundation called SAGE. I'm getting ahead of my, it's called SAGE. Larger devices, much more powerful computers, much more expensive. With the Array of Things project over that 5 years, we collected over 4 billion measurements across the city. So each of those devices every 30 seconds was sending dozens of sensor values for temperature or PM 2.5 or ozone back to our servers. And you, if you're interested, can download that data from our site. The SAGE project is one of 2 initiatives going forward that, as I said, much more powerful device, more sophisticated. That is one path along 2 paths we decided to take, one of which was to really go deep on in situ AI systems that would analyze what's happening right there and have few of those to sort of diagnose parts of the city. And then the other path that we're taking is many, many more devices, simpler, cheaper sensors so that we can get comprehensive coverage. And we've got projects moving in both of those. Something that always comes up, and it's really, this panel is about best practices in Chicago. One of the things that we did was a set of privacy policies and procedures and operational sort of rules that has become an exemplar around the world in projects like this where people are deploying cameras. And we just heard about the Harris School. So we were meeting with Coleman's others at the Harris School toward the beginning of this project. And I was actually surprised that a student in a public policy school challenged us and said, you shouldn't put cameras out there because there'll be too many privacy issues. And my response was, if we from the academic world don't explore how to put cameras in the public way to do the good things that they can do, while also having policies in place to protect against the bad things that they do, then who's going to do that? Industry is not incentivized to do that. You can't find, I don't think, well, maybe you can find the privacy policy for the hundreds of cameras in the, in the automated store by the bookstore, Amazon. But you'll find it, in sort of 50-page documents. It would be hard to figure out what is their privacy policy. Under what circumstances might they use your image as you're shopping in the store? How often will they use it? Will they give it to? So all of our privacy policies were sort of based on these 3 things at the top. One, we we thought about privacy with the architecture of the system that we put together. And so there are mechanisms built into the system that force the processing of images to happen locally inside the node, and that tell us exactly how many of those images get sent back to a server and saved. And the answer is less than a fraction of a percent actually get saved. The rest of the images get processed within that node and then they get deleted. So from a technical point of view, we built a system that respected privacy. From a transparency point of view, on the right-hand side, we did a large number of public meetings where we explained the project in libraries and community centers and got feedback from regular people who live in Chicago and community groups on the privacy policy that we developed. Like, does this make you feel comfortable about the cameras, that our policy is this way? If you have suggestions, you have questions. We ended up with an FAQ, frequently asked questions, document out of those public meetings with 400 comments and questions, all of which were answered, and those are also still out there on the web. And so everything about it was open. All of the data, with, obviously, with the exception of the images, is out there. It's free. It's open and free. And then in the middle, this is where a lot of projects fall short in terms of privacy, is that they have these aspirations and these promises, but there's no built-in accountability. So we built some accountability into the system. That's more than I have time to go into here. But the point is that any sort of change to the privacy policy, if you read our privacy policy, which is only 5 or 6 pages, any change to that has to go through a 6-month public comment period, just as the first one did. And anything that we look to do and decide to, if we want to change something, like maybe put a LiDAR system in that might change privacy, the privacy of the system, we have to explain that change. We have to say what the risks are in terms of privacy and what the mitigation steps are. And that whole exchange between an advisory group and the team is happening in, has to be published, and so happens in a public way. So there's accountability and openness there. That's sort of, I would say, an innovation of the project. Now, the 4.2 billion measurements are various kinds. You can see here just a few examples of publications from the data. Two at the top are some studies that we did of how air pollution impacts aging in public housing. The ones in the middle here on the left, these are publications that compared the sensors that we were using to EPA sensors. We co-located our devices at some of those EPA sites, so we know what we're dealing with here. This one here, it's unfortunate it's so small, but you can see there's some red and blue sort of bullseye target things there. This was a study that was done to say how far away are these measurements happening from what percentage of the population. So the larger circles around those blue and red are just 2 phases of deployment, phase 1 and phase 2. So by the end of the project, we had one of these devices within 1 kilometer of 80% of the population in Chicago. And that meant that the data coming out was actually relevant to people on a neighborhood by neighborhood level. This, you can see this sort of map again is color coded, not because the different devices are different. They're all the same device for the most part, but these are color coded to represent about 20 different science or policy questions that drove the project and that caused us to decide to put those devices in that particular place. You see these green ones here, that's Chatham. The Chatham neighborhood was one of the most frequently flooded in Chicago. And so that green project there was a project looking at flooding. You can also see sort of, I think there's a pointer on here. You can see sort of this circle or this, perimeter around Goose Island. Some of that was environmental flooding, but most of the reason for doing that was that there was going to be a bunch of development on Goose Island. And so we wanted to get before and after traffic flow data. So one more example here, you can see that we did all along the lakefront here. There are a dozen different devices along that 18 miles of lakefront. And that was from the atmospheric science community wanting to understand the lake effect on both weather and air pollution, air quality. So I mentioned that the new devices are much more powerful. So but this is a picture from, this is, anyone guess where this is? So it's like Jackson and State. It's the only scramble crosswalk in the city, at least the only one I know of. So you can see from this image here, it's a little blocked by, this is an example of a sound visualization where you can see a car honking right here and sort of background noise along time is sort of, you know, horizontal. But we can see all the way down the street in both of these directions, plus the entire intersection for science like looking at traffic flow or people or even flooding. With the older devices, the array of things nodes, these are the stage nodes. With the older devices, we could only see this part of the intersection. We couldn't really see down the street. So much better cameras, much better field of view. You can see this is one of the new ones being put up at 87th Cottage Grove, I believe. Okay, some examples of what we call AI at the edge. So by at the edge, I simply mean there's a network that connects these devices. There's a data center back in the center of that network, and at the edge of that network is where these devices live. And these are just examples of what some of our students and postdocs and collaborators have been working on over the last year or two of what we can do with image processing with these devices. And some of them are not strictly urban related. We've got wildfire science. It's difficult, not for us as humans, but for a computer to differentiate between smoke from a wildfire and low-lying clouds. In fact, it's also difficult. This is a project that we did with Exelon. By the way, ComEd installed 5 of our devices in Bronzeville. So this one here, it's also easy for us to look at the sky with our own iBrain system and sort of understand cloud cover. It's very hard for computers to do that. And so some of these, each one of these is an example where a human can pretty easily do this. It's more difficult to get a computer to do it. This one is different than the others. So this one is using acoustic data. And it turns out that you can monitor sound and get a good idea of changes in biodiversity. So this is work that originated with some of our collaborators who put microphones down in the Amazon rainforest and would listen for birds and insect sounds. You could actually see insects and birds sort of appearing or disappearing from that ecosystem and say over a period of time. So we were trying to do this in the city as well. And it turns out there are different kinds of birds that are in the city for biodiversity. The other interesting thing that can be done with sound, it's not an example here, is you don't want to know just how loud your neighborhood is, but you want to know about the types of sound sources. Is this traffic noise? Is it wind? Is it crowd noise? And you want to know about what I would call a noise event. So imagine a noise event would be something above, say, 90 decibels, that's 1 second or more, that might wake you up in the middle of the night. So if you live near a highway, you might see these noise events happening, which would give you some idea as to the health impacts of noise. So as we thought about where to go after the array of things and these 2 paths I described, we had over 120 conversations with people from cities around the world. Oftentimes it was some commissioner or mayor or university person from one of these cities in the little triangles all around the world. That's right, 80% of these were actually going there and talking to them about their needs. Going to Vancouver and saying, what are the things that you want to measure in your city, and then taking that back and folding it into the SAFE project going on. Just before I go on, you can see that the green are actual deployments of where we've got devices. The blue are tests of deployments where we have a device that's maybe in a university laboratory, and this will turn green in a couple of weeks because we just sent, actually this one here sent 10 nodes down to Gold Coast to be deployed down there. So a lot of experience of putting these devices out in other places around the world that went into this sort of 2-pronged approach, moving beyond array of things. I've spent most of the last few minutes talking about this left-hand side where we want to put these very expensive devices in maybe, our current plan is about 50 or 60 of these in Chicago, not 150 like we have today. And these are good for deep science questions about the city, or questions about a particular part of the city. Might have wanted to put a couple of these up around the Keller Center to look at activity while that project was being done, and maybe move them afterward. When it looked like there was going to be the Lakeside project down at the US Steel plant, we actually put one of the array of things nodes there with that sort of idea to watch before, during, and after construction. It turned out we still are only at the before stage 10 years later. Then on the right-hand side, when we went, I was in, say, Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and talking to the local and federal people there about measuring their city. And they said our big challenge right now is the rapid growth in vehicles and cars, and the effect that that has on transit and on air quality. And so they're like, can we put 100 or 200 of your array of things devices in our city? And those array of things devices were about $3,000 a piece. And that was really when it sort of crystallized to me, you don't need $100,000 devices, you need $1,000 $100 devices. And so a lot of our focus over the last year or two has been on this side over here. And we've been doing some projects I'd like to tell you about on this side where lower cost. And imagine, for example, if you're talking maybe $250 for a device that measures air pollution and urban heat. Well, in a neighborhood, let's say, Woodlawn or Hyde Park or Garfield Park, maybe you might want to have 50 of those deployed. So you're talking about a project that's a few tens of thousands of dollars, like less than Tom spent on his appliances, right? But you could, for that sort of amount of money, you could engage a community in measuring their environment. So what we've been thinking on the right-hand side is really understanding what's out there in terms of, and what's coming down the road in terms of low-cost sensors for air pollution and heat and maybe noise as well, and then developing some sort of best practices away out of the Array of Things project and some of the things we're doing here, so that we could say, well, we don't have grant money to pay for your neighborhood, but here's a recipe that you could go through, and maybe some foundations in Chicago might kick in some money to do your neighborhood, and maybe we can talk Mark into doing it with some of this $100 million. So that's what we've been working the last year or two, and everything got delayed, by the pandemic. We started working with Microsoft Research about 2.5 years ago, and finally last summer got 115 of these devices, about the size of a bagel. They are mounted on these bus shelters that JC2Co runs throughout the city. JC2Co runs 2,600 bus shelters. We had about 115 devices that we wanted to deploy, plus some other ones that we put in the EPA site. So this is it's a prototype device. You can't buy it. It's from Microsoft Research. They don't sell it or make it other than for research projects. But it's about a $400 device that measures PM 2.5, 4 different gases, and temperature. And so what this project allowed us to do was work with, through the Environmental Law and Policy Center, work with neighborhoods around the city to do a couple of things. So the first thing that we did was we looked at the city overall here, and we said, based on the topology of the city, the movement of traffic, and other factors, where should we put air quality sensors to get the best picture of what's happening across the city, with the constraint that they had to be on bus shelters, and there are lots of bus shelters. And then what we did with about half dozen of these community community groups, we then went in and we said, well, here's where we think they ought to be. Where do you guys think they ought to be? And then we sort of adjusted the plan within those neighborhoods, kind of a 2-stage community engagement plan on getting these devices located in their neighborhoods. And then something we weren't able to do with the Array of Things project was, I said there's 4.2 billion measurements out there, but for most people, it's like, what do I do with 4.2 billion measurements? What we wanted to do was make this data not just open and accessible, but legible to people who live in the city of Chicago. So if you go to one of these bus shelters that has one of these locations here, then you'll see a QR code on the sticker on the bus shelter. And if you hit that code, you get this web app that comes up. It is going to ask you, what you think the air quality is like. And then it's going to show you, here's, several days of the week. It's going to show you the history of air quality at where you're standing. You get more information. You can also pull up the entire map of the city. So we really worked very hard on this project to focus on integration of this data in ways that would be useful to the city. So I'm going to close off with a couple of other, I would say, exemplars for the way that projects like ours work in cities in Chicago. So one is working with youth. When we were talking to community leaders about our project, they said, "Oh, that's cool. You're going to put cameras up, and okay, you're not going to surveil us. That's great too. But and we think it's really great that you're doing this science. But could you please engage our youth?" And I've been on multiple, lately it's been Zoom calls with community groups. It was one that was actually sort of uncomfortable. I won't say which community it was, but they're pretty upset about the camera. And so I explained to this community group what the camera was doing. It was like, okay, that's cool. And they kind of loosened up a little bit. Then I told them about this curriculum that we developed at Lane Tech High School, and everyone sort of leaned in and got excited about the project because they saw that there was some opportunity for their kids to get involved. We've been doing this since 2016. About 1,000 kids so far have gone through this 8-week curriculum at Lane Tech High School. It was designed by these guys from both Lane Tech and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Sachi was a postdoc or a grad student at School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and then joined Perkins Will. So these are students that from one of the cohorts. They work in teams of 3, and they designed their own wireless sensor device. They have an experiment they want to do with that device. They collect data for a couple weeks, and then they learn how to analyze that data. And finally, what we do, and this happens at Argonne, at least when there's not a pandemic, is back in 2013, we started this summer cohort program of undergraduate and graduate students that come to Argonne, which is out in Lamont, not quite on Argonne's like right around here. They come to Argonne, they work on the platform, they do projects like I showed you, those science projects with computer vision. And then they, go back to their school. So we're trying to increase the sort of talent pool, especially here in the Chicago area, of students that understand how to do this kind of work. And I'll just point out this map right here. This is the combination of the array of things nodes with the Microsoft research nodes that I just showed you. So we have, 250 or so locations around the city. And what's really interesting about this, in addition, of course, there's the 2,600 bus shelters, but each of these locations represents a place where we could put another device. And what I said at the beginning of the Array of Things project, when we started thinking about it 10 years ago, is that within 5 years of putting our whatever fancy devices we put up, the most interesting thing that will be there is that there's a power plug at the 28 feet up on a pole that allows us to put something else way more interesting in 5 years or 10 years. And that's still the case. So I sort of look at that map and see that's the potential for really easily deploying sensors to measure things in cities. And I don't know of any other city that has this sort of accessibility to put devices out like that. There are projects out there that have lots of sensors, but none that have the breadboard that Chicago does. So thanks, and I guess we'll move to our Q&A session.
That was awesome. I love hearing about the array of things. Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to kick us off, and if everyone can just try to be brief, we'll get through as many questions as we can, and I'll try to open it up. Charlie, I do want to, since you just talked, and I want to keep you talking for one more second. I have one for you. What are some surprising use cases for this type of urban data collection that you have come to realize, midstream, that maybe you hadn't considered or your team had not considered before when you're thinking about those original sort of research questions, and now I'm sure brilliant ideas crop up?
I didn't expect we were going to be looking for the types of birds that were flying through the city. So that all the sound stuff has been recent and surprising. I would say it was a little bit surprising that some of the data that we ended up measuring, I'll say, for example, NO2, nitrogen dioxide. The decay on NO2 is fairly short in terms of distance. And so our measurements of NO2 across the city are so far apart, even though, you know, that look from the sky, they look dense, right? So far apart that it's sort of like when you take a sensor and put a bunch of devices out like this, what you're really trying to do is measure the city so that you can predict what the measurement is where you don't have a sensor. So there's a model that you have to develop. And predicting what the value of NO2 was in the city of Chicago from our measurements was sort of like saying, well, the temperature is 103 in Miami and 97 in Pittsburgh and 98 in Dallas. What's the temperature in New Orleans? And the answer is that data doesn't help you. So what was a little bit surprising is that even some of our measurements that were not as useful as we hoped, when combined with other data like the movement of traffic, all of a sudden that did become useful.
That's fascinating. Thank you. I want to kick a question to either Tom or Doug or both. Because one of the themes I noticed in both your presentations was it might be a little harsh to say fixing the mistakes of the past with construction, but you're having to retrofit and greatly improve practices that were put in place. We live in a city with a huge retrofit need and some very old buildings. Are you optimistic about our region's ability to retrofit buildings to become decarbonized or higher performance?
That was kind of the topic of our lunch conversation. And I think that what I wanted to contrast my presentation, which was sort of an idealistic way to go with addressing higher envelope and mechanical systems, is that the reality is that as buildings age, different surfaces and pieces of equipment wear out. And so the question is, how are you going to replace them? How are you going to fix it? And I think that that we're all focusing on, we shouldn't just do that with the cheapest possible thing. We should do that with an eye toward our climate goals in mind as cities and towns like Oak Park adopt climate plans. We realize that we can't just let anything happen. We actually have to pursue electrification, for instance, or pursue higher levels of building enclosure performance. So I think that, when I was calculating this for a talk like a year or two ago about this, I was estimating, we need to do about if we want to meet 2050 Paris Accord targets across the city, looking at the data that I could get from it's out there in the public, it looked like we had to do about, 600 something of these a day. And not to close to net zero, but 50, 60, 70% energy reduction. So a combination of retrofitting and adding renewables. So that is, it's not happening. And I don't know if it will happen. I don't know if it needs to happen with that kind of mindset of change all these right now. But all of those have components that are out. The furnace can be replaced with the heat pump, the dryer, the same thing, the water heater, the same thing. And the technology keeps getting better and the prices keep going down. So in that regard, yeah, I am hopeful, but relative to measurement of getting to what we're doing with AIA 2030, that's a different time scale and it's not happening. So it's a yes and no.
You want to take a swing at that one?
Sure. No, I love that one. So I invite everybody again to the Energy Revolution exhibit, where you will see 3 full-scale walls, one of the Monadnock building, 1890, one of Mise on the Road's Lakeshore Drive Apartments, 1952, and then one of the Academy for Global Citizenship, one of our projects that's underway in the buildings. We did relevant to your point, we scoured the city's benchmarking database and removed outliers like museums, hospitals, and laboratories, and left with kind of a typical commercial building, of which there are about 3,000 in the database, and aggregated them to data points to represent each decade. And what we found was the most efficient buildings in the 2019 benchmarking reporting year were built in the 1880s. And the least efficient buildings were built in the 1950s. And the new buildings being built today were yet to be as efficient as buildings built in the 1880s. So that was a shocker. So we built 3 walls. And when you stand in front of the three walls, one of the things you see is the Mammoth building specifically has a pretty low EUI of 43, which is pretty damn good. But because it lacks any insulation on the wall, it will never be a candidate for electrification because the heat pump technology isn't going to drive enough heat to make that building comfortable. So you can, it's about as good as it's going to get, but it seems destined to be heated with fossil fuels in perpetuity. And then the Nice building, a disaster when architects were delusional and said energy shouldn't be a concern. We have unlimited energy. All the things will of course be heated with fossil fuels in perpetuity because there's not a stitch of it. It's 87% glass. It's 0%. It's got 4 inches of insulation behind the baseboard radiation. And that's a half-inch thing. So, and you know, it's a precious object. So we have to maintain this disaster in perpetuity without altering it, even adding a second layer of glass. So that one will be perpetually heated with fossil fuels. Thank you, architects. And I believe, I mean, my greatest regret, and Tom and I are probably agreeing on this, new buildings being built today, I look at them and they're still super glassy. The codes are set a very low bar. And I think going forward, they're likely to continue to need to be heated in perpetuity with fossil fuels. New buildings yet to be built and on the board today and being built, they're 75% facade glass. Heat pumps just won't keep those comfortably. So like that's my greatest regret is the new stuff. We can't get through the profession fast enough to get out of the glass box of virus.
Thank you. Well, I amend my statement to say the mistakes of specific points in the past. Doug, can I ask you another question? One of the things you showed was, as you predicted EUI in the Keller Center, you showed something where you had a EUI prediction, but then the reality proved to be quite different after your performance. Sure. We've got a lot of modelers in the audience. So why did that model fail? And what can we do better as modelers to improve on that?
So I'm not a modeler, so I'll let the modelers jump on that. But I will say the 2016 model was based on a starting population in the school, which reflected the then current enrollment. It was the Dean Daniel Diermeier's vision to double the enrollment in 5 years. It happened mostly in the first year and part of the second year. So we haven't gone back to recalibrate the model for the new higher occupancy. My hunch is some of the spike is just there were more people in the building. But you know, if you get a grant or could get a grant to look at what exactly happened there and why it's now lower, I don't think the lower is all COVID. I think they're actually learning. They have a problem with professors leaving the windows open. And the humidity would go whack and the system would kick on. And you know, so when professors close their windows, the building performs better.
I'm sorry, modelers, the model didn't fail. I'm sorry I said that.
We don't know.
People
Maybe.
failed. I think that's what Durrell would say. Tom, a question for you. You did a large number of interventions, new measures. I'm in the energy efficiency world. We call them measures, you know, appliances or this type of installation, that sort of thing, focused on decarbonization or achieving close to near zero energy. From your perspective in the residential sector, which of those face the highest market barriers? Which of those are you really worried about? I mean, you mentioned the heat pump clothes dryer that may or may not really dry clothes very well. That seems problematic to me. But you know, are there ones that you feel like I see a barrier here that we're going to struggle with deploying this measure?
Well, I mean, I think one of the most important things, if you look, so like I said, my project did it all. But most people probably don't want to do that. And maybe don't need to, like in a house where you've got existing ductwork that's decent, maybe you can swap out the gas furnace for a heat pump. And I'm not sure it means, you know, like, can we throw a lot of heat? Well, anyway, but so the thing is this: if you just swap out the furnace for heat pump and you're using the existing ductwork, You know, there's problems with, was that ductwork designed correctly? Is it gonna function? You know, so it isn't so much that the technology isn't there or it's not gonna work, it's how it's installed. Is it gonna work? You know, and with mechanical systems, you know, if you're really gonna attack the envelope and you're gonna tighten it up and you're gonna, you know, risk air quality, which I wanted to ask, does anybody here have a CO2 meter? Yeah, where are we at?
In here is around 660 parts per million.
So ventilation's working.
In the lobby, it's more like 410. So we're good.
Okay, oh, that's great. Because in my office, with only 8 people, it gets to like 1,400 if I don't open the door. Drives me nuts. Because now that we're measuring it, you know, it's like, I want my employees to be efficient. You know? Gotta get this down below 1,000. So anyway, that's kind of the sort of thing that happens. The two aspects to decarbonizing, you need to swap everything out to electricity, but your electricity bill is going to go up a lot. It's going to go more than your gas bill, but last year it was, I don't know what gas is doing that. So that's number one. And then number two is really just the building science end. If you are going to attack the insulation and all that, it can really mess up the house if you insulate it wrong. You know, if you don't deal with leaks, things get to be a little more sensitive if you really start to, you know, because the way our buildings are working right now, with these old ones, is they stay nice and dry because you just blow heat through the walls and through the ceiling. And you start to seal it up and put insulation in there, and surfaces that were warm from the inside and colder, you know, get into these issues. So yeah, I worry about this stuff not being done accurately and there being a problem with, you know, mold, et cetera, issues and just not good ventilation.
So we need to treat it as a system.
Totally. Yeah. And how are you going to scale that? So that's tricky.
Right. Actually, do we have time for one or two audience questions?
Yeah, I think so. We can cut a coffee break a little bit short. Let's get one question from the audience. Have we got one here? Maybe? All right.
Thank you, everyone. Those are all very interesting and fascinating. I have a question for Charlie, which is, what are some examples of policy or program changes that might have come about after you analyzed all the data that it actually lead to someone coming up with a program to deal with a different way with the flooding in Chapel or something like that?
I think for flooding, what we're doing now is not so much trying to measure to change a policy, but to validate a plan for fixing flooding. So one of the new devices that we have is at Fifth Avenue in Sacramento. In its position there, it actually has multiple cameras pointed down because the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is putting some treatment there because of frequent flooding. So in some cases, we're trying to measure sort of before and after to be able to evaluate the treatment. In terms of other things that we measure, like let's say the air pollution sensors that also do heat. So we actually do think that data from those will help with the city as it goes about this $46 million tree equity program. Because trees, you know, are good. They're good for flooding. They're good for heat. They're good for air quality. And so we think that those measurements can affect some of the investments that are being made.
All right, thank you, everybody. Let's give a round of applause.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, again, for joining us. We have a 25-minute coffee break. Our final session of the day, session 4, will start at 3 o'clock. So also, if I could ask you folks again, don't take any food out in the hallway. Please take it out here. We've got coffee in the corner.